Earlier, we talked about the back and forth debate over schools opening this fall and that we need an expert opinion. Hello! We want our medical expert, Dr. Kohli, to join this conversation. So as we mentioned, Doctor, first of all, hi, how are you? The CDC will release...
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Will release new guidelines for schools next week. But Doctor, what are your thoughts on schools opening this fall? What would be the right things for parents to do right now?
So Sam, you know, as you guys were just talking about, more than anything, I want kids to be back in school as well, because it's a really important environment for their learning, for their social development. For some kids, they rely upon schools for their school lunches, you know, and some kids don't have internet access at home. But it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach for all kids all across the country and all different schools. Now, as you pointed out, the CDC plans to release some guidance next week. But in my opinion, we already have the roadmap and the blueprint for what we need to do in order to open schools. And the first and most important thing is to look at those White House gating criteria. So we need to have a 14-day decline in cases before we even think about opening schools. Once we have that in a region, we could think about opening schools with social distancing, masks, and staggered schedules, and think about testing. But to the point that Jeff made earlier, not all schools are the same. So elementary schools are very different from high school. So let me tell you about what the science says. It actually says that younger kids, elementary school aged kids, even if they're infected with the virus, are a lot less likely to shed it than older kids, kids greater than the age of 11. They're much more likely to behave like adults and actually shed the virus if they're infected with it. When you talk about masks, if you talk about elementary school kids wearing masks, you actually increase their risk of infection because they're much more likely to touch their face and improperly wear the masks, as opposed to high school age kids, which are obviously much more likely to comply. So there's a lot of considerations here, and it really just can't be a one-size-fits-all approach to opening schools come September.
Wow.
That's exactly what we were talking about. Yep. And this next question, Dr. Kohli, you kind of already answered it. The question is, what are the risks of a kid going back to school during the pandemic? I think you kind of already answered that, but I want you to touch base again. Is it different like pre-K? I know you touched on that, as opposed to grades, 6 through 8 or 5 through K or whatever. Is there differentiation between the groups?
There is a difference, Jeff, and the reason is because the CDC has told us that kids are actually less likely to get the infection as compared to adults. And a few weeks ago, there was a study in the journal Science that actually said that kids are 1/3 as likely to contract the coronavirus infection as adults. So the risk for schools opening actually comes more to the adults than it does to the kids, the teachers, the staff, and the parents. But if you dig deeper, it actually gets more complicated than that, because even though they're 1/3 as likely to contract the infection, mathematical modeling shows that when kids go to school, their interactions with each other are 3 times that of an average adult in a regular day. So that risk actually washes itself out, and there does end up being a risk to kids when they go back to school. So this myth that kids don't get the infection and we don't need to worry and that's why we can open up the schools is really just not a good idea, because not only are the kids at risk themselves, but they're also at risk for bringing it home to their parents, their grandparents, and their caretakers.
Got it. And we just have a few seconds left, so if you could answer this quickly, because we all want to know, what advice would you give parents that are deciding between at-home learning or sending their kids to school in the fall?
That's a tough decision, Sam, but I would say think about 3 things. The first is the age of the child and their health. So are they younger or older? Can they follow social distancing? Are they healthy or are they immunocompromised? The second is think about the school. Is it following some of those guidelines we talked about? Is there good ventilation? Is there staggered schedules? Do you feel safe sending your child there? And then finally, I would say think about the cases in your region. So are they going up or are they going down? And if they're going up, then I would say it's probably a case to do stay-at-home learning for the short term.
So important.
Great conversation, because you don't hear this anywhere else. Everyone's like, no, they're going to school, or no, they're not, and they politicize it. And thank you, Doctor, for breaking that down. I think it's terrific information that people need to know instead of screaming at each other over the internet.
Well said. We appreciate you so much, Doctor.